Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon, and I'd like to thank Icolite Underwater, producing a range of housings for pretty much all the cameras out there. So please head on over to icolite.com to check out what they do for sponsoring this episode. And I'd also like to introduce our regular contributor, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam.
Good to see you as always. And what we thought we might talk about today is whether you have to spend heroic amounts of money in order to get involved in underwater photography. And as a sort of bit of a sub-question to that, really, we thought we might like to talk about other devices apart from interchangeable lens cameras, so SLRs or mirrors, other devices that we might use which allow us to catch pictures underwater. So quite a lot of question to go out there, Alex. Do you want to have a go at answering it, or shall I keep going?
Yeah, no, I'll have a go at dodging that one as best I can. I mean, the quick answer is yes, of course. Underwater photography is about capturing pictures underwater, and there's lots and lots of technology that can do that. And while spending those mega bucks and buying the complicated interchangeable lens cameras is the way that both of us would recommend to get the very best quality that's possible, and to perhaps even make the photography easier, it doesn't mean you can't take pictures that thrill you with any camera. And also, I think, not everyone is going into underwater photography wanting to take magazine publishable pictures, to win major competitions, to have pictures they can blow up the sides of a house. They're perfectly happy with the pictures that they produce with much more modest equipment, and they like the fact that they actually managed to keep their underwater photography sort of something in a box. They're not spending loads of money. The same camera lasts them years and years and years. It fits neatly in a VCD pocket or something like that. And when they see something great on a dive that they want to record and share with people, out it comes, they take their pictures, and then they go back to enjoying themselves on the dive. And I can completely understand that attitude. It's the way a huge number of people enjoy our hobby and get a huge amount of self-satisfaction from it, and their pictures, entertain their friends and impress their family just like any of ours do. So so absolutely. And I also remember very fondly the early days of Wetpixel, the early days of digital underwater photography, when particularly those early digital cameras, some of the early Olympus cameras in particular, in basic polycarbonate housings, revolutionized underwater photography. And although people like me were shooting SLRs, it was the masses who kind of at that time, handed in their CNC Motor Marines and handed in their Nikonos 5 cameras and went over to these small digital cameras, or picked up a camera for the first time ever underwater. And the pictures that they got with that relatively basic compact camera equipment just transformed underwater photography, because, to be honest, the majority of them, even the ones who were new to underwater photography, were taking pictures that the professionals of the previous era were looking at it enviously, because the standards were racing forward so much. So I think that, the revolution in underwater photography, that compact cameras, and particularly those polycarbonate housings that made underwater photography incredibly affordable, certainly for a certain period when the cameras and the housing technology seem to dovetail so neatly. I think that they always will have a really special place. I think the market has changed a lot since those days.
It has, yeah.
Compact cameras on land have become much, much less popular. They sell very few, and as a result, there's far less choice than there once was. And that's, completely the fault of things like this. Telephones is where most people now don't bother having a compact camera, because they use a telephone for everything the compact camera used to do. So, so we don't have the choice anymore. Sorry.
And I think we should bring that into our discussion, though. It is. Whereas once there was a complete range of compact cameras with a variety of price points and obviously capabilities, some of which were suited to underwater photography, some of which were less suited, as it happens. What we have now is we have a much tighter range of compact cameras. Nearly all the camera manufacturers have prioritized so-called professional compacts. So the compacts tend to have bigger sensors in them. They tend to be more competent. They have more options. They typically now, most of them would have, a variety of options that are the kind of options that you would get on an interchangeable lens camera, but just in a different format. Having said that,
really, because they're trying to differentiate their products from telephones and from what action cameras like GoPros can do.
And having said that, I mean, what's interesting now is we're also seeing quite a few people actually going into the market with very well featured housings for mobile devices, for smartphones and so on and so forth. And so to some extent, I think what we're seeing is, okay, you may not now buy a compact camera to take underwater. You might buy a housing to put your iPhone inside it. And I have a certain amount of experience of doing this. And the first thing I would say is that, and this comes from someone that I regularly will put a very expensive SLR camera in a housing, take it underwater with relative, I'm careful what I do, but I'm relatively comfortable doing it. Putting your iPhone in a housing is the most frightening thing in the world because the iPhone as a device contains so many more of the functions that we tend to rely on and use. And the thought of flooding my phone is actually somehow far more scary than the thought of flooding my camera, which is, I know, doesn't sound very sensible, but it certainly seems to be the way I feel. But certainly, I think, the imaging technologies incorporated now in smartphones, for example, it definitely is probably in the same place where those compact cameras were in the early days of underwater photography. Yeah.
Well, I would bet, and I'm sure. I have no idea of the numbers, but I would suspect that I'm right. That the amount of money that Apple and Samsung and the like are spending on developing their photographic capabilities in their phones is more than all the camera companies are spending on their cameras by quite a margin, because it's such a competitive market, and it is incredible the image quality that something that's that thin is able to produce. There's no doubt that imaging capability of phones. That said, I don't think phones are, and GoPros in the same way, are the perfect solution even for a basic underwater camera system. And not because of the fear of flooding one of these, which obviously is a factor, but it's the fact that they don't have proper flash. And underwater photography becomes creative. It becomes much easier to do well when you use flash. And the reason you need to use flash underwater is seawater absorbs the colors of light, and you end up in a very monochromatic world at normal diving depths. So if you take a picture without flash at those depths, you end up with a very blue picture. And you can use white balance to correct some of that, but it has its limitations. And the phone and GoPros are limited by that because they don't have flash. Yes, you can put great big flash torches on them, but if you dive in bright conditions, you have to spend a lot of money on your video lights to get an amount of light that's usable. And the advantage of a compact camera with a pop-up flash, with a built-in flash in it, is that flash can take a lot of pictures, and you can also trigger even a relatively cheap external flash with that, which will transform both the quality of your pictures and the creative potential of the system without it becoming huge. Because I know a lot of people who are attracted to these types of cameras are actually attracted to them because they don't end up with some massive great thing they're lugging around. I would also criticize quite a lot of the phone housings in being big. I think that some of them, they're flat, but it's like, swimming around with an iPad. It's not like, by the time they're in housing and everything like that. And I think that also doesn't fit the neat smallness of that. I certainly remember of those early compact cameras, whether they were Canons, whether they were whether they were, I had Nikon and Fuji down the years, but it was Canon and Olympus. They had some incredibly compact little rigs to base your system around in those polycarbonate housings, and they were absolutely fantastic. And I think the modern equivalents of those are probably the TG series of Olympuses, the Sony RXs, and both are high-spec cameras, but those are the two standouts. And I know there are some quite nice Canon power shots as well, but those are for me the standout compacts now. But there's not a really neat small one that has, that I don't think on the market now, which is a real pity, because I don't think people who are shooting these cameras necessarily need every last millimeter of image quality, but actually several centimeters saved on the bulk of the thing is a big saving to them. And the old compacts with small lenses which could then take small accessory lenses to convert them to underwater wide angle or underwater close-up, I think were very, very neat. And we've lost that from the marketplace now with compacts with great big windows on the front and things like that.
Yeah, and I think there are accessory lenses for all of these cameras that are available now, and often do a very great job. Both macro accessory and wide angle accessory lenses. But as you say, because the sensors have got bigger, and inevitably the megapixel count has increased and everything else, in some ways it's almost counterproductive. You almost need one with a bit less megapixels to achieve. You can get away with smaller ports, smaller lenses, so on and so forth. You mentioned the Olympus TG series, and they have an amazing feature that I think is unique currently, which is they have this microscope mode, which is a sort of preset macro mode, which is actually stunning and is capable of amazing results. The TG series themselves, the TG stands for tough. I'm not sure what the G stands for, but certainly, and they actually are waterproof
Tough
themselves.
Has got G in it, and maybe it's
yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
Schooling these days, so
yeah, that's right. It's showing. Yeah. You can get housings for them because obviously they're limited in terms of depth, and also the housings allow you to mount accessories. Often you can't mount accessories necessarily directly to the cameras themselves. So things like strobes and so on and so forth, which you can apply. The drawback with the Tough series is it doesn't have a manual exposure control. And that, again, for macro, there are workarounds. You can make them work. But obviously, where you want to prioritize things like depth of field, which is still an issue, it's nice to have that adjustment. But, again, it is a super neat, compact kind of setup, particularly without housing. Very much the kind of you can stick in a BCD pocket and pull it out and take pictures when you want to and stick it away again and get great results.
What's the depth limit on I think, aren't they 10 meters, the Toughs?
I think it's 15, actually, the Toughs. So reasonable. I mean,
I think what's great is, if you have a basically an amphibious camera that you can put in a housing to go deeper, if that gives you a lot of confidence should you flood it, because your camera is basically waterproof too. So that's is a massive selling point in the Olympus column. I think there's 2 points. I'd like to change subject slightly, and there's 2 points I'd like to bring up. I think the first one is that although compacts have all these accessories that can really transform their capabilities as underwater cameras, by the time you've bought nice flash guns and nice wet wide-angle lenses and nice wet close-up lenses, your system cost is getting pretty high, and and I think that's something to bear in mind. And it's also your camera is no longer compact. A compact camera doesn't need shorter strobe arms and an SLR to position the strobes in the right place. It needs the same strobe arm. So those factors can make the system grow as big as a much bigger system. And I think that's something to consider. Okay, you will save some weight for travel on the central part of it, but it's not a huge difference. And also the price of all that stuff. I mean, I guess the positive of it is quite a lot of it would be able to move with you should you choose to upgrade. But the downside is you are spending the money that could put you into something that's probably a far more capable underwater photography system. And I would say that still, if your choice for more basic camera equipment is not spending money as opposed to having something small. If you want something small, the route is a compact camera with minimal accessories. If you want something that's cheap but capable, I would argue against compact cameras and more towards second-hand SLR models, particularly ones 5-6 years old, which are incredible cameras that nobody wants. And nobody wants the cameras, nobody wants the housings. People who've got them paid, up to $10,000 for a setup, and honestly now, you can't give them away for $2,000. No one wants them if they have to pay $2,000. They want us spending, $1,000 maybe you'll get for a combined camera and housing. Now the lenses still cost, and the ports still cost, and the strobes still cost, but actually in terms of a camera body and housing, there's ridiculous deals out there because no one is interested in shooting the old gear.
I mean, the only drawback is you have still got ultimately the lump that you're casting around is ultimately a bigger lump. As you point out, Alex, the strobes and everything else, they're the same size, but actually the housing and the camera size is significantly bigger. And for some people, I think that's a significant issue. Yeah.
I wanted to finish though by saying that I do, as I said at the beginning, but I do understand that for a lot of people that shoot compact cameras or shoot pictures with GoPros and phones, it's not simply about having the best underwater stills camera. They want something with them that's small, compact, can carry on every dive, can be ignored for 3 dives in a row, and then they see something amazing, they can get it out, they can shoot stills, they can shoot video, all very simply with a small system, and that video and stills is clear enough, crisp enough for them to share those pictures on social media, share those pictures on, with their friends, without it being a big drag physically in the water and on their diving. And so they can enjoy their dives, and then when they want to dip into underwater photography, they can. And I think if that describes you, then the camera for you is a compact camera in a housing, or a phone, or a GoPro. And if it's still images you want, I'd say the compact camera every time of those 3.
Yeah. No, I think that's good advice, Alex. Certainly, that's certainly where the compact camera is placed. I think that's great. Alex you didn't really have you never really shot compacts a great deal. Have you got Fuji compacts pictures still on your website?
No, I don't. I mean, I've shot compact cameras for reviews and for articles and things, and I borrow them off people when they're on the workshops just to keep my hand in. But generally, the level of photographers I tend to teach, there's very few compacts, and I don't shoot compacts really underwater. I think
I would have a look on. I would have a look on the Wetpixel Facebook group, where there is lots of images shot with TGs and GoPros and phones. So a good place to look to get inspired. Excellent. So thank you very much, Alex. I'd like to thank iCloud again for sponsoring this episode. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Please feel free to add any suggestions or comments in the suggestions box below, and drop us a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.